Alright, welcome everyone to Storybook Monday. Alright, so Storybook Mondays is the show where we share with you guys, or actually we read to you guys from different books from different reading levels. So, today will be a continuation of George Marvelous Medicine. So, for recap, we did start this book last week, but we didn't finish it. So, George is a little boy. He lives with his grandma that he doesn't really like, and he's making a special medicine for her. Alright, so let's continue that. We are going to be starting where we left off, which is page 27. So let's go to page 27 on the street. Here we go. So, the cook up. Alright. In the kitchen, George put the heavy stewing pot on the stove, turned up the gas flame underneath as high as it would go. Hold on. Alrighty. George, came an awful voice from the next room. It's time for my medicine. Not yet, Grandma, George called back. There's still 20 minutes before 11 o'clock. What mischief are you up to in there now? Granny screeched. I hear noises. George thought it best not to answer this one. He found a long wooden spoon in the kitchen drawer and began stirring hard. The stuff in the pot got hotter and hotter. Soon the marvelous mixture began to froth and foam. A rich blue smoke, the color of peacocks, rose from the surface of the liquid, and a fiery, fusum smell filled the kitchen. It made George choke and splutter. It smelled unlike anything he had smelled before. It was brutal and bewitching smell, spicy and staggering, fierce and frenzied, full of wizardry and magic. Whenever he got a whiff of it up his nose, firecrackers went off in his skull and electric pricklers ran along the back of his legs. It was wonderful to stand there stirring this amazing mixture and to watch it smoking blue and bubbling and frothing and foaming as though it were alive. At one point he could have sworn he saw bright sparks flashing in the swirl of foam. And suddenly George found himself dancing around the steaming pot, chanting strange words that came into his head out of nowhere. Fiery broth and witch's brew, foamy froth and rich's blue, fume and spume, and the spume drift spray, fizzle, swizzle, shout, hooray. Watch it sloshing, swashing, and sploshing, hear it hissing, squishing, spissing, Grandma better start to pray. Brown paint. George turned off the heat under the stewing pot. He must leave plenty of time for it to cool down. When all the steam and froth had gone away, he peered into the giant pot to see what color the great medicine was now. It was a deep and brilliant blue. It needs more brown in it, George said. It simply must be brown, or she'll get suspicious. George ran outside and dashed into the father's tool shed, where all the paints were kept. There was a row of cans on the shelf, all colors: black, green, red, pink, white, and brown. He reached for the can of brown. The label simply said dark brown gloss paint, 1 quart. He took a screwdriver and prized off the lid. The can was 3/4 full. He rushed back to the kitchen. He poured the whole lot into the pot. The pot was now full to the brim. Gently, very gently, George stirred the paint into the mixture with a long wooden spoon. Aha! It was all turning brown. A lovely, rich, creamy brown. Where's the medicine of mine, boy? Came the voice from the living room. You're forgetting me. You're doing it on purpose. I shall tell your mother. I'm not forgetting you, Grandma, George called back there. I'm thinking of you all the time, but there are still 10 minutes to go. You're a nasty little maggot, the voice screeched. You're a lazy and disobedient little worm. You're growing too fast. George George fetched the bottle of Grandma's real medicine from the sideboard. He took out the cork and tipped it all down the sink. He then filled the bottle with his own magic mixture by dipping a small jug into the pot and using it as a pourer. He replaced the cork. Had it cooled down enough yet? Not quite. He held the bottle under the cold tap for a few minutes. The label came off the water, but that didn't matter. He dried the bottle with a dishcloth. All was now ready. That was it. The great moment had arrived. Medicine time, Grandma, he called out. I should hope so too, came the grumpy reply. The silver spoon in the kitchen, in which the medicine was always given, lay ready on the kitchen sideboard. George picked it up, holding the spoon in one hand and the bottle in the other. He advanced into the living room. Grandma gets the medicine. Ooh, let's see what happens. Grandma sat, hunched in her chair by the window. The wicked eyes followed George as closely as he crossed the room towards her. You're a light, snapped Grandma. I don't think I am, Grandma. Don't interrupt me in the middle of a sentence, she shouted. But you finish your sentence, Grandma. There you go again, she cried, always interrupting and arguing. You are a really tiresome little boy. What's the time? It's exactly 11 o'clock, Grandma. You're lying as usual. Stop talking so much and give me my medicine. Shake the bottle first, then pour it onto the spoon and make sure it's a whole spoonful. Are you going to gulp all down in one go, George asked her, or will you sip it? What I do is none of your business, the old woman said. Fill the spoon. As George removed the cork and began slowly to pour the thick brown stuff into the spoon, he couldn't help thinking back on all the mad and marvelous things that he had gone into to making of this crazy stuff. The shaving soap, the hair remover, the dandruff cure, the automatic washing machine powder, the flea powder for dogs, the shoe polish, the black pepper, the horseradish sauce, and all the rest of them. Not to mention the powerful animal pills and powders and liquids and the brown paint. Open your mouth wide, Grandma, he said, and I'll pop it in. The old hag opened her small, wicked mouth, showing disgusting pale brown teeth. Here you go, George cried out. Swallow it down. He pushed the spoon well into her mouth and tipped the mixture down her throat. Then he stepped back to watch the result. It was worth watching. Grandma yelled, "Ah-wee!" and her whole body shot up whoosh into the air. It was exactly as though someone had pushed an electric wire through the underneath of a chair and switched on the current. Up she went like a jack-in-the-box, and she didn't come down. She stayed up there, suspended in mid-air, about 2 feet up, still in a sitting position, but rigid now, frozen, quivering, the eyes bulging, the hair standing up straight on end. Is something wrong, Grandma? George asked her politely. Are you all right? Suspended up there in space, the old girl was beyond speaking. The shock that George's marvelous mixture had given her must have been tremendous. You'd have thought she swallowed a red-hot poker the way she took off from the chair. Then down she came with a plop back into her seat. Wow. Call the fire department, she shouted suddenly. My stomach's on fire. It's just the medicine, Grandma, George said. It's good, strong stuff. Fire, the old woman yelled. Fire in the basement. Get a bucket. Man the hose. Do something quick. Cool it, Grandma, George said. But he got a bit of a shock when he saw the smoke coming out of her mouth and out of her nostrils. Clouds of black smoke were coming out of her nose, blowing around the room. Yikes. By golly, you really are on fire, George said. Of course I'm on fire, she said. I'll be burning to a crisp. I'll be fried to a fizzle. I'll be boiled like a beetroot. George ran into the kitchen and came back with a jug of water. Open your mouth, Grandma, he cried. He could hardly see her for the smoke, but he managed to pour half a jugful down her throat. A sizzling sound, the kind you get if you hold a hot frying pan under cold water, came up from deep down in Grandma's stomach. The old hag bucked and sheed and snorted. She gasped and gurgled. Spouts of water came shooting out of her, and the smoke cleared away. "The fire's out," George announced proudly. "You'll be all right now, Grandma." "All right?" she yelled. "Who's all right?" "There's Jackie jumpers in my tummy. There's squigglers in my belly. There's bangers in my bottom." She began bouncing up and down in the chair. Quite obviously, she was not very comfortable. "You'll find it's doing you a lot of good, that medicine, Grandma," George said. "Good?" she screamed. "Doing me good? It's killing me." She began to bulge. She was swelling. She was puffing up all over. Someone was pumping her up. That's how it looked. Was she going to explode? Her face was turning from purple to green. But wait. She had a puncture somewhere. George could hear the hissing of escaping air. She stopped swelling. She was going down. She was slowly getting thinner, shrinking back and back slowly to her shrivelly old self. "How's things, Grandma?" George said. No answer. Then a funny thing happened. Grandma's body gave a sudden sharp twist and a sudden sharp jerk, and she flipped herself clear out of the chair and landed nearly on her 2 feet on the carpet. "That's terrific, Grandma," George cried. "You haven't stood up like that in years. Look at you. You're standing up all on your own, and you're not even using a stick." Grandma didn't even hear him. The frozen, pop-eyed look was back at her again now. She was miles away in another world. Marvelous medicine, George told himself. He found it fascinating to stand there watching what it was doing to the old hag. What next, he wondered. He soon found out. Suddenly she began to grow. It was quite slow at first, just a very gradual inching upward, up, inch by inch. Getting taller and taller, about an inch every few seconds, and in the beginning George didn't notice it. But when she had passed 5'6" mark and was going up towards being 6 feet tall, George gave a jump and shouted, "Hey, Grandma, you're growing up. Hang on, Grandma, you better stop now or you'll be hitting the ceiling." But Grandma didn't stop. It was a truly fantastic sight. This ancient, scrawny old woman getting taller and taller, longer and longer, thinner and thinner, as though she were a piece of elastic being pulled upward by invisible hands. When the top of her head actually touched the ceiling, George thought she was bound to stop, but she didn't. There was a sort of scrunching noise, and bits of plaster and cement came raining down. "Hadn't you better stop now, Grandma?" George said. "Daddy's just had this whole room repainted." But there was no stopping her now. Soon her head and shoulders were completely disappeared through the ceiling, and she was still going. George dashed upstairs to his own bedroom, and there she was, coming up through the floor like a mushroom. "Whoopee!" she shouted, finding her voice at last. "Hallelujah! Here I come!" "Steady, Grandma," George said. With a high "No, no, no," and up we go, she shouted. "Just watch me grow." "This is my room, Grandma. Look at the mess you're making." "Terrific medicine," she cried. "Give me some more." She's dotty as a donut, George thought. "Come on, boy, give me some more," she yelled. "Dish it out, I'm slowing down." George was still clutching the medicine bottle in one hand and a spoon in the other. Oh well, he thought, why not? He poured out a second dose and popped it into her mouth. "Ah-wee!" she screamed, and up she went again. Her feet were still on the floor downstairs in the living room, but her head was moving quickly towards the ceiling of the bedroom. "I'm on my way now, boy," she called down to George. "Just watch me go." "That's the attic above you, Grandma," George called out. "I'd keep out of there. It's full of bugs and boggles." Crash! The old girl's head went through the ceiling as though it were butter. George stood in the bedroom gazing at the shambles. There were a big hole in the floor and another in the ceiling, and sticking up like a post between the two was the middle part of Grandma. Her legs were in the room below, her head in the attic. "I'm still going," came the old screechy voice from up above. Give me another dose, my boy, and let's go through the roof. No, Grandma, no, George called back. You're busting up the whole house. To heck with this house, she shouted. I want some fresh air. I haven't been outside for 20 years. Wow. By golly, she's going through the roof, George told himself. He ran downstairs. He rushed out the back door into the yard. It would be simply awful, he thought. If she bashed up through the roof, his father would be furious, and he, George, would get the blame. He had made the medicine. He had given it too much. Don't come through the roof, Grandma, he prayed. Please don't. The brown hen. George stood in the farmyard looking at the roof. The old farmhouse had a fine roof of pale red tiles and tall chimneys. There was no sign of Grandma. There was only a song thrush sitting on one of the chimney pots, singing a song. The old Rizzles got stuck in the attic, George thought. Thank goodness for that. Suddenly, a tile came clattering down from the roof and fell into the yard. The thrush took off fast and flew away. Then another tile came down. Then half a dozen more. And then, very slowly, like some weird monster rising up from the deep, Grandma's head came through the roof. Then her scrawny neck and the top of his shoulders. How am I doing, boy? She shouted. How's that for a bash up? Don't you think you better stop now, Grandma? George called out. I have stopped, she answered. I feel terrific. Didn't I tell you I have magic powers? Didn't I warn you I had wizardry in the tips of my fingers? But you wouldn't listen to me, would you? You wouldn't listen to your old Grandma. You didn't do it, Grandma, George shouted back. I did it. I made you a new medicine. A new medicine? You? What rubbish, she yelled. I did, George shouted. You're lying as usual, Grandma yelled. You're always lying. I'm not lying, Grandma. I swear I'm not. The wrinkly old face high up on the roof stared down suspiciously at George. Are you telling me you actually made a new medicine all by yourself? She shouted. Yes, Grandma, all by myself. I don't believe you. But I'm very comfortable up here. Fetch me a cup of tea. A brown hen was pecking about in the yard close to where George was standing. The hen gave him the idea. Quickly, he uncorked the medicine bottle, and poured some of the brown stuff into the spoon. Watch this, Grandma, he shouted. He crouched down, holding his spoon to the hen. Chicken, he said. Chicken. Come here, have some of this. Chickens are stupid birds, but very greedy. They think everything is food. This one thought the spoon was full of corn. It hopped over, it put its head on the side, and looked at the spoon. Come on, chicken, George said. Good chicken. Chick, chick, chick. The brown hen stretched out its neck towards the spoon and went to peck. It got a beakful of medicine. The effect was electric. Owie! Shrieked the hen, and it shot straight up into the air like a rocket. It went as high as the house, then down it came into the yard. Sploosh! And there it sat with its feathers sticking straight out from its body. There was a look of amazement on its silly face. George stood watching it. Grandma up on the roof was watching it too. The hen got to its feet. It was rather shaky, but it was making funny gurgling noises in its throat. Its beak was opening and shutting. It seemed like a pretty sick hen. You've done it in, you stupid boy, Grandma shouted. That hen going to die. Your father be after you now. He'll give you socks and serve you right. All of a sudden, black smoke started pouring out of the hen's beak. It's on fire, Grandma yelled. The hen's on fire. George ran to the water to get the bucket of water. That'll hen be roasted and ready for eating any moment, Grandma shouted. George sloshed the bucket of water over the hen. There was a sizzling sound. The smoke went away. Old hen's laid its last egg, Grandma shouted. Hens don't do any laying after they've been on fire. Now that the fire was out, the hen seemed better. It stood up properly, it flapped its wings, then it crouched low to the ground as though it was getting ready to jump. It did jump. It jumped high in the air and turned a complete somersault, then landed back on his feet. It's a circus hen, Grandma shouted from the rooftop. It's a flipping acrobat. Then, now the hen began to grow. Ooh. Alrighty. Whoa, the hen is growing, wow. George had been waiting for this to happen. It's growing, he yelled. It's growing, Grandma. Look, it's growing bigger and bigger, taller and taller it grew. Soon the hen was 45 times its normal size. Can you see it, Grandma? George shouted. I can see it, boy, the old woman shouted back. I'm watching it. George was hopping about from one foot to the other with excitement, pointing at the enormous hen and shouting, It's had the magic medicine, Grandma, and it's growing just like you did. But there was a difference between the way the hen was growing and the way Grandma grew. When Grandma grew taller and taller, she got thinner and thinner, but the hen didn't. It stayed nice and plump all along. Soon it was taller than George, but it didn't stop there. It went right on growing until it was just as big as a horse. Then it stopped. Doesn't it look marvelous, Grandma? George shouted. It's not as tall as me, Grandma shouted. Compared to me, this hen is titchy small and the tallest of them all. I am the tallest of them all. The pig, the bullocks, the sheep, the pony, and the nanny goat. At that moment, George's mother came back from shopping in the village. She drove her car into the yard and got out. She was carrying a bottle of milk in one hand and a bag of groceries in the other. The first thing she saw was a gigantic brown hen towering over little George. She dropped the bottle of milk. Then Grandma started shouting at her from the rooftop, and when she looked up, she saw Grandma's head sticking through the tiles. She dropped the bag of groceries. How about that then, eh, Mary? Grandma shouted. I bet you'll never seen a hen as big as that. That's George's giant hen, that is. But, stammered George's mother. It's George's magic medicine, Grandma shouted. We both of us had it, the hen and I. But now, how in the world did you get up on the roof? Cried Mother. I didn't, crackled the old woman. My feet are still standing on the floor in the living room. This was too much for George's mother to understand. She just goggled and gaped, and she looked as though she was going to faint. A second later, George's father appeared. His name was Mr. Killy Cranky. Mr. Cranky was a small man with bandy legs and a huge beard. He was a kind father to George, but not an easy person to live with because even the smallest things got him all worked up and excited. The hen standing in the yard was certainly not a small thing, and when Mr. Cranky saw it, he started jumping about as though something was burning his feet. Great heavens, he cried, waving his arms. What's this? What's happened? Where did it come from? It's a giant hen. Who did it? I did, George said. Look at me, Grandma shouted from the rooftop. Never mind about the hen. What about me? Mr. Cranky looked up and saw Grandma. Shut up, Grandma, he said. It didn't seem to surprise him that the old girl was sticking up through the roof. It was like the hen that excited him. He had never seen anything like it, but then who had? It's fantastic, Mr. Cranky shouted, dancing around and around. It's colossal, it's gigantic, it's tremendous, it's a miracle. How did you do it, George? George started telling his father about the magic medicine. While he was doing this, the big brown hen sat down in the middle of the yard and went cluck, 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 cluck. Everyone stared at it. When it stood up again, there was a brown egg lying there. The egg was the size of a football. The egg would make scrambled eggs for 20 people, Mr. Cranky said. George, Mr. Cranky shouted, how much of this medicine have you got? Lots, George said. There's a big potful in the kitchen, and this bottle's here is nearly full. Come with me, Mr. Cranky yelled, grabbing George by the arm. Bring the medicine. For years and years I've been trying to breed bigger and bigger animals. Bigger bulls for beef, bigger pigs for pork, bigger sheep for mutton. They went to the piggy first. George gave a spoonful of medicine to the pig. The pig blew smoke from his nose and jumped about all over the place. Then it grew and grew. In the end, It looked like this. They went to the herd of fine black bullocks that Mr. Cranky was trying to fatten for the market. George gave each of them some medicine, and this is what happened. Wow. Giant animals everywhere. Then the sheep. He gave some to his gray pony, Jack Frost. And finally, just for fun, he gave some to Alma, the nanny goat. Alright. A crane for Grandma. Grandma, from high up on the rooftop, could see everything that was going on, and she didn't like what she saw. She wanted to be the center of attention, and nobody was taking the slightest notice of her. George and Mr. Cranky were running around and getting excited about the enormous animals. Mrs. Cranky was washing up in the kitchen, and Grandma was all alone on the rooftop. "Hey you," she yelled. "George, get me a cup of tea this minute, you idle little beast." "Don't listen to the old goat," Mr. Cranky said. "She's stuck where she is, and a good thing too. But we can't leave her up there, Dad," George said. "What if it rains?" "George," Grandma yelled. "Oh, you horrible little boy, you disgusting little worm, fetch me a cup of tea at once, and a slice of currant cake." "We'll have to get her out, Dad," George said. "She won't give us any peace if we don't." Mrs. Cranky came outside, and she agreed with George. "She's my own mother," she said. "She's a pain in the neck," Mr. Cranky said. "I don't care," Miss Cranky said. "I'm not leaving my own mother sticking up through the roof for the rest of her life." So in the end, Mr. Cranky telephoned the crane company and asked them to send their biggest crane out to the house at once. The crane arrived 1 hour later. It was on wheels, and there were 2 men inside it. The crane men climbed onto the roof and put ropes under Granny's arms. Then she was lifted right up through the roof. In a way, the medicine had done Grandma good. It had not made her any less grumpy or bad-tempered. But it seemed to have cured all her aches and pains, and she was suddenly frisky as a frit. As soon as the crane lowered her to the ground, she ran over to George's pony Jack Frost and jumped onto its back. The ancient old hag, who was now as tall as a house, then galloped about the farm on a gigantic pony, jumping over trees and sheds, and shouted, "Out of my way, clear the decks, stand back all of you miserable midgets, or I'll trample you to death," and other silly things like that. But because Grandma was now much too tall to get back in the house, she had to sleep that night in the hay barn with the mice and the rats. Alrighty, so we are going to call it there, and then we'll finish the final 30 pages next episode on Storybook Mondays. This is Jimmy signing off. We will see you guys next time.